Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you're a man with money, you will attract women who are interested in that money. The question is not whether this happens, it does. The real question is whether you can tell the difference between genuine attraction and calculated interest before it costs you. There are men who have built something for themselves, status, lifestyle, financial stability, and yet find themselves asking the same thing over and over again. Does she actually like me? Or does she just like what I have? It's a reasonable concern on the surface. After all, just as women worry about being used for their bodies, men worry about being used for their resources. Same dynamic, different currency. But here's what most people get wrong. This isn't some complex mystery. The people who are looking to extract value, whether it's money or attention, are rarely subtle. They reveal themselves constantly. The signs are there, obvious, repetitive, almost predictable. The problem isn't that they're hard to detect. The problem is that most men ignore what's right in front of them until it's too late. These situations aren't sophisticated operations. You're not dealing with master manipulators running flawless long-term strategies. In most cases, the behavior is obvious if you're paying attention. It's closer to standing on train tracks. While a slow-moving train is coming straight at you, there are signals, noise, warning signs. If you get hit, it's rarely because the train was invisible. It's because you chose to stay on the tracks. Before getting into the actual defense strategy, it's important to understand the underlying dynamic at play, especially if you're a man with means. Wealth, status, and lifestyle are inherently attractive. That's not controversial, even if people like to downplay it. Attraction often follows hierarchy, and those at the top of that hierarchy benefit from it. The issue begins when those assets become your primary method of attraction. If you haven't developed the ability to generate attraction through presence, behavior, and emotional stimulation, then you will naturally lean on what you have. Money becomes a shortcut. Lifestyle becomes bait. Status becomes leverage. This is what's known as an attraction proxy, something external that stands in for genuine connection. And like any form of bait, it determines what you catch. If you lead with money, you will disproportionately attract people who are motivated by money. That's not bad luck, that's alignment. At the same time, trying to completely hide your resources isn't a viable solution either. If you downplay everything, if you deliberately obscure your advantages, then you remove the very signals that differentiate you from every other man. You collapse yourself into the average, and now you're competing in a much larger, noisier field. There's no strategic advantage in that. So the real objective is balance, and the cleanest way to understand that balance is through an analogy most people already understand: a job interview. Imagine walking into a room where someone is deciding whether to select you. If you minimize your capabilities, if you understate your value in an attempt to appear humble, you leave without making an impression. You don't get chosen not because you weren't qualified, but because you failed to communicate it. On the other hand, if you walk in and aggressively list your achievements, if you assume entitlement purely based on what you have, you may actually get selected more often than the first approach. It's not ideal, but it works better than disappearing into the background. Still, neither extreme is optimal. There is a wide range between invisibility and arrogance, and that's where effective positioning exists. The correct approach is controlled visibility. You don't hide what you have, but you also don't center your identity around it. Think of it like this. If you own something valuable, it should exist in your life as a normal extension of it, not as the focal point. When people encounter you, they should be able to notice it without being directed toward it. There's a useful metaphor here. If you have access to a high-end lifestyle, it belongs in the background. Not hidden, not exaggerated, just present. People who are truly accustomed to a certain level of living don't constantly signal it. It's not a performance, it's normalized. And that normalization is what communicates authenticity. When something is in the background, it sends a specific signal. You are used to it. It's not new, it's not defining, and it's not something you need validation for. Ironically, This makes it more powerful. People notice what is unspoken far more than what is announced. When you don't try to impress, the impression becomes stronger. There's also a behavioral layer to this. When you treat your lifestyle as ordinary, you remove the transactional frame. You're not saying, look at what I can give you. You're saying, this is simply how I live. That distinction matters. One invites negotiation, the other establishes context. This is where many men fail. They either overcompensate, leading with displays of wealth, or they underplay, hiding everything in an attempt to avoid being targeted. Both approaches create problems. One attracts the wrong attention, the other eliminates your advantage entirely. The goal is to present your reality without attachment. Let it be seen, but not emphasized. Let it be experienced, but not offered as leverage. This creates a natural filter. It allows the right people to engage while quietly discouraging those who are only interested in extraction. Once you've established this baseline where your wealth, status, and lifestyle are present but not performative, you've already reduced a significant portion of the risk. But this is only the first layer. The real protection doesn't come from how you present what you have. It comes from how you allow access to it. Once you've established that balance where your lifestyle is visible but not performative, the next step is where the real protection happens. This is the part most men either misunderstand or refuse to enforce. Because it sounds simple, but it requires discipline. The principle is this: never separate yourself from your resources. Read that again, because everything hinges on it. Your money, your lifestyle, your access, these things must remain tied to your presence. They are not independent benefits. They are extensions of you. The moment they can be accessed without you, you've created a loophole, and that loophole is exactly where exploitation begins. In practice, this means something very specific. When a woman is with you, spending time in your world, participating in your life, she can enjoy what comes with that: the travel, the experiences, the comfort, the environment. All of that exists within your frame. It's shared because she's sharing space with you. But the moment she steps outside of that, physically or psychologically, access ends. No random financial support, no covering expenses that don't involve you, no solving problems that exist entirely outside your shared experience. Because the second you start doing that, you're no longer offering connection, you're offering utility. And utility can be extracted without attachment. This is where the distinction becomes critical. If someone can benefit from your resources without investing in your presence, then you've made yourself optional. And once you are optional, you are replaceable. At that point, it's no longer about you, it's about what can be taken from you. This is also where gold diggers reveal themselves with absolute clarity. They test boundaries. At first, it's subtle, small requests, minor conveniences, things that seem reasonable on the surface. But if you pay attention, you'll notice a pattern. The requests begin to detach from you. They are no longer about shared time or shared experience. They become about independent gain. And if you comply, the pattern escalates. The requests become more direct, the justification becomes more emotional, and eventually, if you resist, the pressure begins. Not always aggressively, but consistently. This is where manipulation tactics enter. You'll see appeals to sympathy stories designed to trigger your sense of responsibility. You'll see guilt suggestions that your refusal reflects poorly on your character. You'll see pressure, subtle or explicit ultimatums that attempt to force a decision. And in many cases, you'll see a complete reframing of the relationship. Suddenly, you're the one being judged. You're the one who's selfish or inconsiderate or not serious. The narrative flips. The goal is to make you question your position so that you abandon it. But if you understand the structure, none of this is confusing. Because the moment someone tries to separate you from your resources, they've already told you exactly what they're there for. That's the signal. Not how they act when everything is easy, not how they behave when benefits are flowing naturally, but how they respond when access is restricted to your presence. That's where intent becomes visible. And this is where most men fail, not because they don't see the signal, but because they don't act on it. They negotiate. They justify, they make exceptions, they tell themselves that this situation is different, that this person is different, that this one request doesn't matter. But it does, because it's not about the amount, it's about the structure. Once you break the structure, you set a precedent. And once a precedent is set, it becomes the new baseline. The correct response is simple, but it requires consistency. You hold the line. If she wants access to your world, she participates in your world. She comes to you. She engages with you. She shares time with you. That's the condition. You are the center of access. Think of it this way. If you are the source of the benefits, then proximity to you is the requirement for receiving them, not distance, not absence, not convenience, proximity. If someone is unwilling to meet that condition, then they are not interested in you. They are interested in what you can provide without being involved. And that's not a relationship, that's extraction. Eventually, if you maintain this boundary, one of two things will happen. Either she aligns with the structure, meaning she values the connection enough to stay within it, or she pushes harder, trying to force a separation. And if it escalates to ultimatums, the decision is already made. Because anyone who demands access to your resources without committing to your presence has already disqualified themselves. At that point, the correct move is simple. You let her go. No negotiation, no second guessing, no attempt to salvage something that was never aligned to begin with. Because once someone shows you that they are more interested in extracting value than building connection, there is nothing left to fix. And here's the part most men overlook. Walking away is not a loss. It only feels like a loss if you were measuring value incorrectly. Her situation hasn't improved without you. In fact, it's likely returned to exactly what it was before. The only difference is that she no longer has access to what you were offering. The experiences, the environment, the opportunities, all gone. What she revealed wasn't just intent, but judgment. Short-term gain over long-term positioning, immediate extraction over sustained access. In other words, poor strategy. And that's the final filter. When you keep your resources tied to your presence, you don't just protect yourself, you force clarity. The right person stays within the structure. The wrong one tries to break it. Either way, you get your answer early.